Attention all units, please stand by to copy a BOLO. BOLO from Anytown PD regarding a delayed homicide. The incident occurred at 123 Any Street, Anytown, USA. No suspect or vehicle description provided. All units are requested to respond to helpsolvethecase.com for briefing. Clear BOLO 0818 hours. All right. Well, this is Christine Burke here with Help Solve the Case today, and I'm very excited because today I'm talking with Brett from VMAR, and I don't even want to attempt to talk about what that stands for, but you can. And I thought it would be really interesting. I've worked with Brett on a couple cases, and to talk about that, and also just because I think that people, for me, I want to know what I'm using or what I'm working with or whatever. And I think it's very interesting what a vehicle can tell you and things that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And because we work on a lot of different type of cases, from unsolved cold cases, maybe some wrongful conviction, we may have an opportunity that we may need to go back and look at what the vehicle could tell us if there was a vehicle involved. And so I thought it would be really super interesting. Brett really knows a lot. He's been really helpful in some of the cases maybe we can talk about, and just it gives you things to think about, because a lot of times, especially if we're doing a cold case from years ago, we have more technology or different things now, not that we necessarily have the vehicle, but it's just so amazing, the evidence or whatever that we have at our fingertips. So I will be quiet, and we want to give a warm welcome to Brett. And if you could just kind of tell me, like, I don't even know, we've worked together a while. I don't even know your background. Tell us a little bit about your company and how you kind of got involved in this. And then the main question, like, what can the car tell us specifically to your specialty?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Excited to be here to talk with you. My name is Brett. I work for VMAR. That stands for Vehicle Mechanical and Accident Reconstruction. So primarily, we reconstruct accidents and do whatever it takes to accomplish that. We also do some work investigating like fires and arsons that other people at my work handle. But yeah, as far as my background, so I got a master's degree in bioengineering. And actually, while I was going to school, one of my professors said he knew a guy who did accident reconstruction and biomechanical engineering, sort of forensically. So he got an email from that person. And while I was in the office, he said, "Oh, this person's looking for someone to hire." And he's like, "Are you interested in a job?" And it's like $20 an hour. While I was in college, I was like, "Ah, that sounds great." So that's how I started about 9 or 10 years ago. That was my previous company, and now I'm with VMAR. So
let me interrupt you just for a second. So you said biomechanics. Is that like your degree was in what? Because I think people go, like, they say, okay, I'm going to get a degree in this and I'm never going to use it. Or what exactly is the degree?
The degree is biomedical engineering.
Biomedical. Okay. So not biomechanical, biomedical.
Well, yeah, that's the degree. And then I specialized in biomechanics. So took some additional courses and did a project related to biomechanics.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, and then you lucked out. That sounds so awesome.
Yeah.
And you got the job. Yeah. Cause people say, how do I get into this? It's so fascinating. And so let me ask this, sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Cause inquiring minds will probably want to know, or maybe it's just me, but so what were you going to do if you weren't going to do this? What were you going to do with that degree? Or what did you think you were going to do?
So I didn't really have a good idea. I was technically pre-med, so I was considering going that route. I was kind of good at math and science, and bioengineering sounded really cool. So I got into it, and there are a lot of different routes you can take. A big one is medical devices, to get into that industry, designing those and all the regulatory requirements related to that.
Okay.
But yeah.
Cool. Okay, I guess if I can just simplify it a little bit, is we're going to be talking about and when you mentioned that, I first heard about that, I did some SIU work, right? And so we had somebody come and talk about the body, right? The way, and what we're going to talk about is I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the biomedical is about the way the body responds to the accident, and then we're going to talk about the way the car responds in the accident or with whatever's going on, or
Right. Yeah. Kind of the process regarding injury potential and a forensic view biomechanically is how the car responded to the impact or whatever happened, then how the person responded relative to the vehicle, and how their response correlates to a potential for injury or determine whether or not they were wearing a seatbelt or something like that.
okay. So what's coming to mind is the ad where we see the crash test dummy. I don't know who that is, Volvo or whoever it is, crashing into the wall. Is that sort of the kind of things?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We use that kind of testing all the time. Those are called anthropometric test devices, or the
Okay.
crash test dummies. Yeah.
Okay,
They
cool.
measure, they have, yeah, tons of sensors in them that measure forces and accelerations and all that.
Wow. So it sounds like we might need a field trip.
Yeah.
You got a lot of
But
walls around the buildings. No, that's cool. Okay. So that can give, I'm a very visual person, so that can give our listeners, because they're listening, maybe an idea of what that's going to look like, what we're talking about, how the, when the car hits it, what the car does, and
yeah,
what the person does.
yeah, yeah. So like if a car hits it going straight and hits a barrier, the car stops, but the person's got inertia, so they don't stop initially. They go forward into the seatbelt. Hopefully, the airbag deploys if it's deemed necessary. That helps them. If they're not wearing the seatbelt, they probably go out the windshield.
Yeah. Okay. So let me insert my PSA here, my public service, whatever announcement. I don't know what that stands for, but
Yeah,
I just remember I learned that way back when I was a police officer, that the force, right?
yeah,
That and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you want to have, like, you'd rather have a glancing than a straight on, because that's how so much damage comes to the body, because like you said, the car stops, but that force has to dissipate some way. And
right. Yeah,
and you can have a lot of trauma on your body.
right. Yeah, and you want the energy and force to be dissipated over as long as possible. So the longer the event, the lower the acceleration is going to be. You go in 60 miles an hour and come to a stop over 10 seconds, and it's normal and no injury. But if you hit a wall, you come to a stop in 0.1 seconds, that's when you have a problem.
Well, see, this isn't even what we thought we were going to talk about, right? I just think
Right.
it's so interesting, right? Because it's just people don't realize how significantly, I guess, you can get hurt, and why things in the car are constructed that way, and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess let's talk about, like, I don't even know, because I've seen you come out, and I think you had like some computer apparatus that you hooked up
Yeah.
to what they like to call the black box or whatever. And
Right.
what do you do? Like, let me just do this. Like, what's a typical day like for you? Are you out in the field? Are you behind the desk? Like, what kind of
Um, Mostly behind the desk.
stuff?
And then, yeah, I'll go out to the field to inspect the vehicles or an accident scene. But yeah, it's all the device is a special device for obtaining electronic data that's stored in the vehicle. And it's actually from the airbag module, which is the part of the vehicle that knows how severe an impact is, so to speak. So like we were talking about, you don't want the airbag to deploy if you're just coming to a stop normally, but if you come to a stop very quickly, you do want it to deploy. And the airbag module is the part of the vehicle that has the processing unit that determines whether or not the airbags need to deploy or don't, or the seatbelt pretensioners deploy or whatnot. And that's where we
Wow.
obtain the data from through the download.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't even know that. So it's like a G-force kind of thing
Yeah,
that.
accelerometers. Yeah, they measure the acceleration, which is G forces, term for that. So if they're high enough, if they come on quick enough, the car will think that it's going to need an airbag. So it's got to decide within about 20 milliseconds whether or not the airbags need to deploy. It can't wait till the crash is over, then say, "Oh, airbags are needed," because it'll be too late. So it's got to look at that first 20 milliseconds or so and say, well, the acceleration came on so fast that it's probably going to be a severe enough accident. We should deploy the airbags.
Wow. Because I remember, I think when I first got exposed to traffic reconstruction, and I'm going to date myself, it had something to do with the light bulb. Like I remember the traffic officers who would do that. There was something to do with the filament or something in the light bulb, like in the headlight, which, like, way back then.
Yeah.
But that's so interesting because I wouldn't even think that it would be in the seatbelt thing, right? And then we do hear all this stuff in the news. Again, like I said, we're going to be all over the place, but we hear this stuff in the news about the airbags malfunctioning and all that stuff. I mean, does that have to do with the sensor thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of claims about malfunctions that are not true, but occasionally there are actual malfunctions.
Oh, and that could be a lot of damage. So okay, let me ask you this just from like morbid curiosity, because I've seen some accidents with some airbags and people, they seem to be really hurt from the airbags, right? Like broken noses or forearms, or like I've seen some police officers really banged up from that. But can you speak to, because people don't like those and people disconnect the airbags and stuff like that. So can you talk anything about, even with the broken nose or, abrasions on your forearm and stuff, the reason that thing is so good to protect you?
Yeah, it's all about kind of weighing the options, whether you want the airbag to deploy and prevent you from hitting your face on a hard steering wheel or a windshield. They're designed and engineered to only deploy once it reaches the threshold where it's going to do more help than it would do harm. So impact severities are oftenly categorized or gauged by the change in velocity of an impact, or delta V, which is a big term in accident reconstruction. So for instance, if you're going straight at 20 miles an hour and hit a wall and come to a stop, then the change in velocity is 20 miles an hour. If you're going 30 miles an hour and rear-ended, so now you're going 50 miles an hour, your change in velocity is also 20 miles an hour. So typically, you don't have airbag deployments in rear-end impacts, but in frontal impacts, if the delta V reaches around 12 to 16 is the range where you might get an airbag deployment. But when it gets around 16, they should be designed to deploy the airbag, because that's when it's going to do more help than harm.
Wow, that's just crazy, because you see it, and when they first came out, people being scared of them, but they're actually there to help, right? And now I think some of the ones we have side.
Oh yeah, there's airbags all over the cars now.
Really?
Both sides of the seats, the curtain up along the top rail. There's knee airbags.
Wow.
Yeah, and then airbags in front are now dual stage. So if there's a lesser severe accident, they'll deploy the first stage, but if it's a more severe one, they'll deploy both stages so that it comes out with more force to absorb you going into it better.
Wow. Okay. So when it comes out and inflates, it's putting a cushion, but is it trying to push some of that force, dissipate it back?
Yeah.
Or is it just cushioning you?
Well, yeah, the whole premise is that it kind of catches you like a glove, and you've got a longer time duration, which again lowers the acceleration of your body. When your speed's dissipated over a longer duration, the accelerations are lower, and that's helps prevent injury.
Wow, so interesting. Okay, so aside from the airbags, are there other things that you look at? Like what is, gosh, I don't even know how to ask this. Like, what is the most common thing that you're asked? I would assume from the work I've done, like, was it going that fast? Did they brake? Like, what can a car really tell you aside from the airbags?
Yeah, well, classically accident reconstruction, the big thing we're asked to do is how fast was the car going at impact or a little before impact, because were they speeding? Are they the cause of an accident, basically? And nowadays, well, in the past, you used to be able to do it you had to do it just from evidence of the scene, like the skid marks after the impact and before the impact, along with the crush damage to both vehicles. But nowadays, you can use that in conjunction with the electronic data that you can pull from vehicles in the airbag module.
And
So
so does it tell you what like would it is it just about braking and speed, or does it tell you and we talked a little bit about the infotainment center, which might be, different about, I don't know, I don't even know if radio would come into that, or the texting and all that garbage that's going on, but does it tell like turn signals or anything like that? How what exactly does it pull?
so I guess I should, so as far as, you know, there's different parts of the vehicle that we can possibly pull electronic data from.
Okay.
The main one is the airbag module, and that contains a thing that's called an event data recorder, or an EDR, which is what people call a black box
Like on the
generally.
airplane.
Right, right.
Okay.
It doesn't have communications over radio like an airplane would, but it has sort of what the vehicle's experiencing. So the airbag module, well, as far as what vehicles have them, so in from model year 2013 and newer, all vehicles, just about all vehicles, will have them, and we can obtain data from those vehicles. Some vehicles go back as far as the 90s, like GM vehicles, Chevy, GMC. There's some Fords start in the early 2000s, and so did Toyota. But 2013 and newer, most vehicles will have the event data recorders, and they can record non-deployment events or deployment events. So non-deployment is like it sounds. It's when an airbag or a seatbelt pretensioner doesn't deploy. Typically the threshold, so it won't record anything if the change in velocity is less than 5 miles an hour. But if it is greater than 5 miles an hour, it'll record a non-deployment. And then if it airbag deploys, it'll be called a deployment event. And both non-deployments and deployment events, they'll record 5 seconds of vehicle speed prior to impact, as well as the crash pulse, so which would be the delta V, or the acceleration during the crash. So some people are concerned that we're gonna obtain like personal driving habits from the modules, but that's not the case with the event data recorders. That's only about 5 seconds of data at the time of the accident. It's not.
So that's okay, because I think what you're talking about is I've seen it. I don't know if it's Allstate or Progressive. Like you put that thing in the car, they're watching that all the time.
They are watching your habits, yeah.
Okay, but the EDR only records, so it's on continuously, but it's only gonna save when it's triggered.
Right. Yeah, it's continually looking for basically the algorithm's got to wake up when it senses a certain amount of acceleration. It'll wake up, and then if it gets above a 5 mile per hour change in velocity, it'll record it into memory and be saved there. Now that data can be overwritten if there's another event or multiple other events, and some GM vehicles will overwrite the non-deployments after a certain amount of ignition cycles. But when there's a deployment event and airbag deploys, those will not be overwritten at all. They can't be. They're stored, and that's because initially these were designed for manufacturers to monitor how well their airbag systems functioned. So if there was a crash, they could go back and see, oh, well, what were the details of the crash, and did the airbag
come on at the right time?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So it wasn't once again technology that wasn't designed to spy on you necessarily. It was designed to gauge whether the product was working correctly. But now, so when you were talking about 5 miles per hour, so let's say, for instance, I'm driving down the road and a deer runs in front of me and I slam on the brakes. Is that something that's going to trigger it, even though there's not a me hitting something else?
That will likely not record an impact. The weight of the deer is too light. And that's the case we see, unfortunately. Well, I don't say unfortunately. It's unfortunate we don't get data from a lot of the pedestrian and bicyclist impacts. They're just too light compared to the vehicle. The change in velocity of the vehicle is not going to reach 5 miles an hour. It might be like 0.2 miles an hour from a person or something. So a lot of times we'll check the vehicle just to make sure there's nothing in it. But there won't be. Like the case I think we worked on together, I checked, it was a pedestrian one, and I downloaded the data, and sure enough, there wasn't anything in there, but it's important to check.
Okay. So when I was talking about the, Bambi,
Yeah.
Even not hitting Bambi, like if you come to a complete stop to avoid Bambi, so even though, because that would seem to me a deceleration or whatever, at that level, the car is it's still not going to be enough to trigger a recording.
Right. So deceleration from hard braking could be like 0.8, 0.9 Gs of acceleration. And that, the airbag modules record over 150 millisecond period, because that's typically how long an impact will be. But over 150 milliseconds, if you're at 1 G of deceleration, you're not going to get a 5-mile-per-hour change in velocity.
Okay.
Because
That's
acceleration,
math.
is equal to the change in velocity over the change in time.
Okay. So, all right, cool. Okay. So, I think people want to know, because like we were just saying, it was designed for this, but it's in there, and that's a whole nother section. There's a lot of stuff that, if you want to use the word spies on you, and you don't even realize it with the technology. So I'm trying to think what else, like, do you have something really significant that you can talk about that kind of surprised you with the car? So we're going to talk about the airbag, right? So maybe the airbag did not deploy, but they had an accident where they impacted something, right?
Yeah. There's cases. Well, we've had cases. I don't know. This is kind of not what we're talking about, but people will think there was a manufacturer defect where the airbags didn't deploy and they should have. So we'll go and look at it, and it will be recorded in there as a non-deployment event. I've had an accident that was a 25-mile-per-hour change in velocity, which is very severe. And like I was saying before, airbags should deploy anywhere from 12 to 16. It didn't deploy, but it rightfully didn't deploy. It's because it was such a long duration. Oh. Basically, by the time the airbags would have deployed, the occupant would have moved enough and been out of position so that the airbag deployment would have caused more harm than it caused, or than it caused more harm than good. So
the technology is paying attention, right?
Yeah, they have seat sensors to know where the person is, and if they're not in their seat, then you shouldn't deploy an airbag, because if you hit someone on the side of the head with an airbag, that can cause some damage.
Okay, so I want to know about that, because I know I'm trying to remember if it was in this truck or my other truck, like it would tell me that the airbag wasn't on in the passenger seat, right? So yeah. So I've got to ask, like, what kind of seat sensors? Like, what does your car know about you? Like, I have to ask that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things. A Tesla case recently that we did, they have sensors for every single seat, as well as seatbelt sensors. So if there's something recorded in your EDR, if there's an event recorded, it'll tell you the occupancy status of each seat, whether or not someone's in it, and whether or not they had their seatbelt on. And a lot of them will also say adult or child based on the weight. So it's a force sensor basically that measures the weight put on a seat. So like if you had a heavy box in your seat, it could think there's someone sitting there.
Wow. So don't lie about who was in the car or what happened, right? You're not going to get away with it, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting too, because like I said, I did some SIU work, and they didn't pull that all the time, right? They didn't go and get that. But they can. And so that's where, you don't want anybody to lie at all, but you have to know that, if
you try to commit fraud, there's a lot of ways that you can be caught, including the infotainment, which can track navigation logs, but that's a whole nother discussion. And one thing to point out though, is that as there's a thing called the Driver Privacy Act of 2015, so that the owner of the vehicle has to give permission to download that data, or else you either need a court order or a warrant to get that. So yeah, it's important to know.
Yeah. Well, for the public, but I mean, if you're involved in something, to me, getting a search warrant, like that's nothing. They're going to get.
It's more relevant on the civil cases where it's like a small injury claim or something.
Yeah. I was thinking about something that I had seen where the tire pressure valve was I don't know, probably read in some spy novel or some book that it records the GPS or some sort of something. Is that true or whatever, that it they can track you something in the tire pressure something? Does that make sense? That it would set off I don't remember what it was. Did they
I've never heard of anything in the tire pressure valve
So it was like
tracking
it
you.
was like a Bluetooth so maybe you can look this up and you can come
Okay.
back and tell us, but I forget what it was, that it carries some type of a identifier in the tire pressure, something to do with the tire, and the GPS or the Bluetooth or something picked it up, but I don't know. So I thought that was
Wow.
really interesting. Yeah.
I know lots of new vehicles have tire pressure monitor systems that'll tell you
That was
exactly
it. Yeah.
the
So that, because
PSI in
that
your tire, but I don't know if there's any wireless communication with that.
that's what they were saying, that it does communicate. So yeah, so
Wow.
like to know about that, because again, right, and I look at this from both sides, devil's advocate on the cold case
Right.
and the wrongful conviction, doing the criminal defense and stuff like that. I mean, if you're not doing anything wrong, but you kind of want to know what's tracking you.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. But so we were talking about during an investigation, telling the truth. And one of the things that we talked briefly about before we came on, I'd like you to talk about some of the work you've done on some of the cases, but I just think you had mentioned not talking about the police cases, but people in general. Well, and it does involve the police cases, like accidents or whatever, that people's perception, because I think, and what we see in the wrongful convictions, people rely on their perception and eyewitness testimony,
Mhm.
and talk about that. And then, because I want to delve into what I've seen in the police work too, not intentional, but the
Yeah.
difference between what people say and what I say, what the perception is, and then what the facts are. And it's
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah. That's a big thing is, if you trying to figure out what happened and someone's a witness to a crash or something, their testimony is obviously probably going to be given a lot of weight.
Mhm.
There have
Yeah.
been, I don't know the titles or authors, but there have been studies that have basically had someone witness a crash or follow behind a vehicle and then ask them, how far behind the vehicle were you, or how much time elapsed from this to then, and they're off by a lot usually, and not intentionally. It's just for whatever reason, psychologically, you don't have a good gauge of time or distance sometimes. And like one thing is people will say, I was at the stop sign or the stoplight for 5 minutes before I was rear-ended, and there's hardly any stoplights that are going to have a 5-minute cycle. It's usually
Right.
1 minute. So it's like, that can't be true. No,
I don't
way
know.
off.
There's some long ones, but yeah, I know
Yeah.
what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And, again, yeah, but so I've worked civil cases for personal injury attorneys, and that's one of the things, like you say, they, aside from criminal cases, and they're like, okay, call this person and see what they have to say, and call this person and see what they have to say, right? And
Yeah.
most officers, I mean, and maybe that's technology that's coming. I mean, God forbid they're putting the 5G everywhere, but the officer, I mean, we could get to that point that the officer, sticks the little USB in the car, and it's going to tell them what it says. But the officer, having done it myself, if they're skid, I mean, that's the way I used to do it, old school.
Yeah.
What piece of the car is broken, and where's the, what they call crush deformation or whatever, like where's the damage, and the skid marks, and what are the people telling you?
Yeah.
To try to figure out, and that's like where it goes. This one says this, he said, she said, and if it goes to court, and that could be a lot of money in a insurance claim or whatever. Who's going to pay?
Oh yeah.
Who's not going to pay? Yeah.
Yeah. Cars are kind of going that way. They're another technology I wanted to talk about. I haven't got there yet, but on Toyotas, Lexuses, and Scions, they're all sort of under the Toyota brand. They have what's called a vehicle control history, or VCH, which is a separate system, but it's also physically in the airbag module. We can get data from it when someone hits their brakes hard or accelerates rapidly. So not even crash events, but some of them will take snapshots of what's in front of the vehicle at that time, a series of like pictures, black and white pictures. And we tried it on a rental car actually, and found, when other people were driving it, we found pictures of what was in front of them basically. So I mean, as far as a cop doing it right at the accident scene, that's probably they're going to need a warrant to do that type of thing. But there is, video and kind of stuff coming out like that, especially with Teslas too.
Wow. Okay. So I want to talk about that, but that brings up something that I had in a personal injury case where um I guess the other driver, which I have a couple friends that have, I'll call it the GoPro or whatever, they've got because I guess that's popular in Europe or whatever. Everybody just
A
records
dash
everybody's
cam.
traffic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that case, the other driver or a witness driver had turned over the camera to police, like no warrant, they just handed it
Yeah.
over. But that sounds really interesting in your case. So I mean, again, this is privacy, right? We're, the infotainment, that's something else we'll talk, in another session. But so you're saying that you rented the rent-a-car and pulled up whenever
Yeah.
where everybody else was driving.
Yeah. So you hook up a computer to it, just the OBD2 port under the dashboard. It's easy to accept. You just hook it up to there and then basically press download, and then it'll give you the information. And yeah, I mean, like, well, it'll show it. That kind of does show driving habits. Like if you hit your brakes hard a lot or accelerate rapidly a lot, it'll show that. It'll show
Well, that's the
5 times
thing.
a day.
That's the thing I hear. I think it's called Snapshot, or one of the insurance companies
Oh,
talks about that, right?
yeah.
That's the same sort of thing, right?
Yeah, it's very similar. I haven't really looked into those snapshot things from insurance companies very much, but they must just be an extra accelerometer that they put in there, or it's directly connecting to the airbag module and getting that data consistently. Could be that, but it's
Wow.
probably just monitoring the vehicle acceleration over time. So if
Wow.
you brake too
Yeah.
hard or accelerate too fast, then
Yeah,
you could
that's
be
what they're saying, because
termed a bad driver.
they're trying to slow down whatever aggressive driving. I think I don't know. I try not to listen to the commercials, but I remember hearing that, and I'm like, well, to me, it's just a privacy issue. Like, why would you put that? But people to
Well,
save money or whatever.
yeah, one of the things I wonder if why they haven't done, or I guess it's too much of a privacy issue, is give discounts for people who have dash cams. Like I have a dash cam, and it's always going to usually tell you who was at fault, and that's what the insurance company wants to know. It'll save them money and trying to subrogate or figure out,
Yep.
hire attorneys to figure it out. But there's always problems with that. Like if you cause the accident, you just pull the memory card out and say it wasn't working or something.
Well, I think that's the thing, how much do you want to be monitored? If you're good, then yeah, let's have at it and let's save money. But at the same time, if even if it's accidental and you screw up or something, and then I don't know, it's the whole privacy issue, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's very interesting about the Toyotas and stuff. So it's got a little camera embedded in there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, the forward braking systems that, I don't know if you know, adaptive cruise control, where it basically, if you set your cruise control, it'll recognize the vehicle in front of you and keep you at a set distance and behind that vehicle. So it's got sensors, lidar, and now cameras too.
Wow. So
Yeah.
that's being in Arizona, have you guys or is there anything, I'll call it Waymo or whatever, right? I mean, you're bringing that up. Now we're talking about self-driving
Yeah.
vehicles and stuff like that. I would
Yeah,
assume.
we're getting there, and if all vehicles become self-driving, then that kind of is going to take a lot of my work away
Oh.
because there'll be less accidents. But that's way down the road where they're all
Well,
like
but then
that.
you'll
But
be arguing, instead of for the person or whatever, you'll be arguing for the vehicle, right? What the
right.
technology did.
Yeah, basically the software and hardware is working appropriately.
Who had the glitch, right?
Yeah.
So I know we've been talking for a while. I just think it's so interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit because I had mentioned about perception, and what I thought it was interesting, having this technology, and again, people using it. But you had helped out in a couple cases. One of them, trying to remember. Well, again, we have a report from, let's just say, drivers, that this happened and that happened, and I thought it was really interesting the way you were able to help us put it together, not only from the vehicular items, but from the body camera to talk
Yeah.
about what happened. And that was really interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, on the criminal cases, it's when there's police involved with body cams, there's often more than one officer. So what we've done is time synced multiple officers' body cams together, so you can see the accident happening from multiple different points of views. Because if an officer's in a vehicle and they've got their body cam down on their chest, it's not going to catch. I mean, the dashboard blocks almost everything.
But yeah,
So
let
if
me
you've got
tell you, if I see that steering wheel one more time,
yeah, it's just an hour of a
sometimes it's
steering
the
wheel.
most important part, and that's all you're seeing. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So yeah, we've done, yeah, in the one case we did, I think there were a few officers, we time synced their videos, and we also did three-dimensional recreation of the scene using, I don't need to go much into detail, but laser scanners and a drone to do a 3D point cloud and sort of recreate everything accurately according to time, where vehicles were on the roadway.
Yeah, I think, and in that case, which I don't think I ended up getting to see the final with the laser and all that stuff, but it was interesting to be able to have that, because again, perception and not, pro police, negative police, or whatever. I think it's very, very interesting that in that particular case where the charge was something against the police officer, right? So and this is something else that I talk about it, because then they become the victim, right? And so it was something involving vehicles, and so then their perception of what they saw and what went on, it's just a very interesting, it's a very
Right.
interesting thing. So to be able to recreate that, because the normal thing for me is, I watch one video, I watch the body cam video, and then I've got to watch the car video, and and hopefully they don't turn them off. That's a whole nother subject. But
Yeah.
and then another car and another, and it's just very hard. So having it all at the same time, especially in that type of event, because that thing was just a convergence of, like
Yeah.
when an accident happens, it's not okay. We're going to do this, and it's
Yeah.
bam, and to try to sort
Yeah.
it out.
It's, yeah. And someone who's in the accident's got, their adrenaline going. And so for them to say something happened that's not entirely correct after we look at these synced videos, it, kind of shows you that people don't intentionally lie. It's just they didn't perceive it correctly or remember it correctly.
Exactly right. How fallible, like we all think. I remember going back, and talking about that, going back to the police academy. And one of the things that they did to try to illustrate that was they all of a sudden, like a fake robber or whatever came in the room and snatched something and ran back out. And, we have 30, 40 people in the room, and they're like, give me the description. And I mean, people are arguing. It was a red shirt. It was a green. It was a
Yeah.
and it was a tall, and it was right. So then you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Things that you think would be obvious that you like, or things you thought you absolutely saw, but didn't necessarily.
Right. And you've probably seen that in I don't know if you review, the people's interviews or whatever, and they're adamant. It was this, it was this. And so I guess just giving people a little grace and understanding. And in cases I have brought in for both police and regular civilians, a psychologist, about memory and eyewitness and how all this happens. And we haven't even talked about subjectivity, which in the case that we're talking about, based on what the perception was when it happened, so that they're thinking this and the other person's thinking that, and just very interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. People want to think they're correct, and you got to read, when evidence, objective evidence comes out that disproves that, you've got to be able to take a step back and say, well, okay, you got to accept it.
Well, I can be fallible or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I just think it's so interesting, and that brings up something that one of the cases that I'm working on now, an officer is testifying in court with the memory and not even looking at that, which to me seems to be problematic. Like, why wouldn't you look at that? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
I've had a case where an officer wrote in a report something happened a certain way, and their own body cam shows that that's not correct. And it's like, just go back and look at it and,
Right. And
make the
again,
correct.
is it, like you're talking about, is I don't feel that's necessarily intentional, right?
Right.
Because they know, one of the things that I do and I go in all these cases is I know where the information is, kind of like, in the car, okay, well, this is going to show this is going to show that. I know within the police world about where the information is going to be. And the officer should know
Yeah.
that the report is going to say one thing and dispatch is going to say another thing. And, you're not going to lie on a report, but I think, and maybe that's something I do some training. I don't know. Maybe that's something to approach the academy with. I don't even know if they do any training with the body cam or whatever. But if you think about it, what you were talking about, I guess as a police officer, and I'm just talking about myself, you get used to, because people say sometimes like, well, that didn't even phase you. I'm like, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
compared to a normal person, because I'm used to seeing all that. And so maybe they just take for, I don't want to say for granted, but you don't even realize the stress and the all those factors that come on. Like, you just think you're doing your job, and yep, I'm recording it in my head and I've got it all down. And
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an officer, but I imagine day to day the tons of reports and incident descriptions they have to do, and they just do it, and they don't really have the time to go back and review hours of body cam footage.
well, right, they don't get paid for that. And that's
Yeah.
one thing. When I was process serving for a long time, and one of the things I was looking for my sticky notes, and just trying to remember all of that, I would put it in the car, and I would take one and I would put it on the papers, and I would go to the door, and whatever happened, they're not home, or the dog's barking, or and as I'm
Yeah.
walking to the car, I'm writing my notes, because I could have 20-30 papers to serve, and no, you're not going to remember it all. And then that way it gets put down there, and it allows you to have more focus on the next call. But yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it's knowing your limitations and everything, and where finding stuff that helps us. I mean, that's why I think this is so important. Is there anything else, or I know, because we're getting close to time, anything else that you think would be interesting to people, or something that you've worked on that
Let me
might
see. I
be?
had wrote some stuff down.
I think that's interesting about the cards taking the pictures. See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, one of the types of vehicles that can have a lot of data is a Tesla.
Oh yeah, talk about, a lot of people are turning to those.
Yeah. So they have the EDRs like a lot of other vehicles do, and record a lot of the same information, which I didn't really get into all the things that can record, but so like steering 5 seconds before the impact. So that could show, someone steered to get out of control, or was turning left, or whatever. Brake pedal application, the percent of throttle. Yeah.
The seeds, you mentioned the seeds.
The seats, yeah, whether or not they were occupied or not. But yeah, that's what we can pull from a Tesla, but they store a lot more information than what we can pull, and that's sent to Tesla themselves. And you have to
Opt
either have
out.
I don't know if you can opt out,
I'm just,
actually.
because I'm thinking, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking like, that kind of sounds like Microsoft, and like all that garbage on your computer that, you automatically get opted into, that you need to opt out, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, with
that thing's constantly monitoring the car,
yeah,
and sending it to them?
Yeah. With self-driving vehicles and their, driverless stuff, they've got to know that their product's working correctly. So
Oh, see,
video
that's giving
footage
me
showing.
like, whew,
Yeah.
I'm getting the uncomfortable, as my mom would say, the heebie-jeebies, like, oh, like I mean, I think it's helpful, but the public doesn't know. Like,
Right. There could be a video of the entire incident, but we can't get it because we don't have either court, on my end, don't have a court warrant, court order or warrant. And there's so much data. We've talked to Tesla before. There's so much data that you basically have to give them a 10-minute time, or give me all the data from that vehicle over 10 minutes, because just that 10 minutes is going to be hundreds and hundreds of pages of data just from the vehicle that they're
like,
always.
Have you seen some of well, I would assume that maybe the infotainment downloads like the cell phone, right? You've seen some of those cell brights, like that's a lot of stuff, right? But
Yeah.
But just with Tesla, and I'm all for getting a warrant and whatever, but I just think that people don't. I have a friend that owns a Tesla, and I don't, and not that I'm the major privacy advocate or conspiracy theorist, but I'm like, oh my God, I bet she has no idea that the car is capturing all this stuff.
Probably not. Some Teslas, I think it's either a Model 3 or Model S. You can put a SD memory card right in the center console and pull your data out like that, which is kind of cool that they allow you to get it yourself, just saved on a memory card. It's not all the data. I mean, there's more data that they're getting that I don't think you can.
Well, that's okay. So maybe that's in the user manual. It's kind of like going to your Facebook page and
yeah,
when you download all that, I mean,
give me all the analytics you have on me, basically. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's scary too. So, wow, it's just incredible. I mean, there's just so much. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back. I appreciate it. I don't want to keep you too long. But it's just so interesting. And I'm glad that you make yourself available. You guys have been really available. And you did mention the fires, which hopefully I think maybe Dave, we can talk to him, because we do have a fire case that everybody is interested about. And when I was talking with him on the phone, he was talking again about just body position and things not looking right. And that's what I think you have to have is in doing these type of cases, whether it's a cold case or a wrongful conviction, somebody that can just look at something. Like sometimes it's just a second look, not that somebody was right or wrong or whatever, but just a second look to be like, why is that like that? And then it would take you down a different path, because I think people get the tunnel vision or whatever, and they definitely go down the thing. And it's kind of like they say, speaking of cars, you want this brand new car and nobody has one. And then as soon as you drive off the lot, like everybody has the exact same car. And so I think we can have bias as investigators, or just as people, like we're talking about recollection of stuff, where you have in your mind what you think it is. It's so hard to distance yourself. And then the train goes off in that direction. And that's where I think some of these mistakes happen. And for me, I try to play the devil's advocate and eliminate everything else and make sure that it's not everything else. I mean, and not that you can necessarily be 100%, but to try to rule out everything. And I just think this stuff is so important, and specifically just what we were talking about, perception versus what I refer to as facts, right? Well, the car says this, and the car has
very accurate.
No reason to lie. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And
of course.
If anybody, we're going to bring you more of this stuff, and just to let everybody know, if you want to join in and be a virtual investigator and help with us, aside from the podcast, we have the bullpen. We got the live cases that we investigate at helpsolvethecase.com and at patreon.com/helpsolvethecase. So thank you, Brett. Thank you so much. And we'll end it. And
thanks for having me. It was fun.
We'll talk to everybody soon. Thank you.